Eminent domain laws had never been used for economic development until Kelo versus the City of New London in 2005. That is definitely force, and people deeply resented it. In the wake of that decision, many states, including Kansas, have passed legislation countering that to stop that kind of force happening within their state. And a final example I could think of was the work to or welfare to work legislation from the from 1996 in the Clinton administration, which basically stated that if you want to receive welfare, you need to be applying for a job and or working a certain number of hours in a job. Well, in some ways that's positive. It got people into the workforce or forced people into the workforce to get some experience that they didn't otherwise have, perhaps, um, by making this a priority for them. But on the other hand, it created a giant pool of people who were willing to take any type of work, including really low menial work, low paid menial work, just so they could receive their welfare benefits. It's a type of subsidization of the U.S. government to to businesses that employ very low skilled, low wage workers. You have to do it. So those are some examples of force. Okay, but what about fraud? That's what I more want to talk about tonight. Um, We talked a little bit about Milton Friedman last time, right? Milton Friedman came on PBS with his Free to Choose series, and it was he was Uncle Milty. He was highly persuasive. He sounded extremely smart. He was a professor of economics from Chicago, and I mean, PBS. It was kind of an authority figure at the time in our media. It's been downgraded since, but at that time, it was a big deal. It was kind of like the stamp of approval. This must be something worth considering. And he was highly persuasive. So in his own way, he was an early ideological strong armor. And as I mentioned last time, he did treat free market capitalism as a sort of substitute faith. He was fairly explicit about it. He didn't really think that like genuine religious faith was necessarily all that good for capitalism, nor was it very productive. He thought that a well oiled, functioning economy would be more productive and take care of more problems than being idealistic and religious. Now, I want to try to make clear that what I'm talking about when I talk about this type of ideology is not a reality but a narrative or a story, right? There's a difference between the the ideology that we're sold and the rhetoric, the how leaders talk about it and what they do. Okay, so in this, I'm dealing primarily with what they say and what they say persuades us. But these two characters here were pretty highly persuasive back in the 80s. Um, and they were putting out a narrative. They were telling us how great America could be if we adopted and fully embraced this free market narrative, this free market ideology. Okay. Ronald Reagan spoke very eloquently in his farewell address and really throughout his presidency about this idea of the beautiful city on the hill, right? That was America, that was kind of like a shining beacon for all. And if we just stayed true to ourselves as he defined us, we would not only save ourselves, but save the world. And he tied it up kind of subtly with the Christian faith in the sense that he said that, America held a kind of providential place, a place of almost like God blessed place in world history, where, we guided by God would be able to lead the way, right? and that we needed to embrace this freedom. And part of that freedom, which America stood for and which God wanted, was free market freedom, right? Um, and at the same time, he introduced in his presidency, well, it was actually since the 40s, we'd had a good share of this, but he definitely amplified this this enemy to hate, which was the opposite, supposedly, of his way of thinking of free market ideology, collectivism. And I just wanted to read a little section from my book on this. Um, Sometimes that's the best way to proceed, right? This storyline that made free market capitalism the moral equivalent of Christian faith was so attractive partly because of America's pre existing city on a hill civil religion. It reflected America's notions about its providential place in world history, inspired by the ultimate battle of good versus evil conveyed in the Bible. It piggybacked on simple categories already in the other that everyone knew and could understand. More importantly, with all our attention focused on what we were not, godless communists who hated freedom and competition, we were free not to think about what we were turning into. Godless materialists whose social organization of big business and big government also impeded the freedom to choose. For instance, the freedom to choose to be a homemaker rather than to get a job was impeded. Filling in the blanks to square capitalism with Christianity is how the improbable combination of support for unfettered capitalism became such a powerful emotional force in American rhetoric. And I say in parentheses, of unfettered capitalism, the support for unfettered capitalism, which, as we have seen, decimated rural life, split up families, automated out of existence previously venerated professions, especially farming and the trades, and destabilized Christian moral foundations. Logically, it never made a lot of sense. Emotionally, it made absolute sense in the same way Stockholm Syndrome allows prisoners to admire their captors. And I will try to explain that last statement. So, there's a concept I found helpful from Mark Fisher, whose book is Capitalist Realism. Capitalist realism is the idea that we have embraced this notion that capitalism is the only natural system. It is the natural system. It doesn't reflect a choice. It's not a choice, it's nature itself. And any alternative that bucks against nature, human nature, basically, is foolhardy and dangerous. Okay. Therefore, we either can face reality and embrace self-interest as a mechanism for, getting things done and collective work, right? What amounts to collective work through individual choices. Or we can try to resist that, in which case we're getting in the way of progress and we're getting in the way of actually helping people and making the world a better place. Okay. So the idea that capitalism is a natural reality, like a fulfillment of historical evolution, or just like the way, people were always destined to be, that is ideological strong arming. It's basically saying you're just not accepting reality if you don't like, how this system works. This is another quote from the book, and it features Eugene McCarraher, who's going to talk to us this spring. McCarraher's book is fantastic, by the way. Really, I mean, it's really lengthy, so warning on that front. But it's really good. And if you don't want to read that, like his smaller book, Christian Critics, is really like a precursor to that, and it's really good. And he's also got some lectures out there online too. But anyway, Eugene McCarraher's massive enchantments of mammon, how capitalism became the religion of modernity, has a special place for the Friedman faith in its discussion of what has come to be known as capitalist realism, a term coined by Mark Fisher. Capitalist realism conveys the sense of ineluctability and futility that political realism conveys. Our current capitalist order is the way it is, and any attempt to change it is foolhardy. In the name of such realism, all objections are to cease, and any ideas for a different way of life are to be scoffed at. Conveyed in a flippant rhetoric of historical determinism, inexorable, irresistible, irreversible, these and other auguries of market predestination were volleys in what David Graeber has called a war on the imagination, a blitzkrieg against utopian speculation, a mission to sabotage the capacity to even dream of a world beyond capitalism. Okay, that's that's a quote from McCarraher. Any pain caused by the current system was to be suffered as preferable to the pain inflicted by trying to resist it. Therefore, all the precarity, dislocation, and humiliation caused by automation and globalization, all the loss of wealth caused by reduced real wages and benefits and increasing costs of retooling, are just what is normal, and we can only do worse. As McCarraher puts it, these assaults on the livelihood and dignity of workers have been justified as painful but necessary steps on the interminable road to progress, guided by infallible market forces to which we owe homage and genuflection. So, note there that part of the message is if you're suffering right now and you're struggling and you're working your ass off, just trying to make a living and you're doing everything you can and it's not paying off for you, you still should, you know, you should just persevere because you're on this historical progressive train that's going to lead to amazing results at least for your children, right? For other people in the future. So if it's not paying off for you, you should still, sort of obey this dynamic because down the road people are going to benefit. So it's a system, a way of thinking in which no matter what happens, there's always a reason to kind of stick with it, right? To believe in it, to buy into it. Um, and so, this is part of the strength of it. It is a system that once you get into this way of thinking, starts to make you feel as though your choices are paramount and that your responsibility is paramount. So you start to not see the system so much as your own choices. Okay, so in this way of thinking, the capitalist economy is seen as this fact of nature, not a result of choices. That is our choice whether to have capitalism or not. Um, to disagree with the prevailing free market ideology is seen as naive, stupid, or dangerous. And who wants to be naive, stupid, or dangerous, right? Like that was the message that Friedman was portraying. Anybody who's smart, who wants to be savvy, who understands economics, is going to agree with me, right? And if you don't, you're naive, you're stupid, or you're a communist. Okay, that's a lot. It's that's a lot of pressure actually. That's social pressure, psychological pressure. You don't want to feel stupid. You don't want to, if everybody else agrees with this, like why would you disagree? And you sure don't want to be the enemy, right? This loathsome other that everybody else is lumped into. Part of the belief system is that you can help others by helping yourself, that the best way to, greed is good. It's like the best way to, um, lift all boats is to try to lift your own, keep your head down, think of only yourself. I don't think that's actually at all I mean, maybe it's a little true. Everything's a little true, it seems like, but there's an awful lot that slips through the cracks when people just think about their own self-interest. And it is this idea that the market is godlike, that it's an irresistible force. that we need to obey, cooperate with, or get out of its way. And if you're starting to think that sounds like God, indeed, it does, doesn't it? And that's Mammon. Mammon is a god, right? Um, and this is the psychological, phenomenon that I'm so fascinated with is that people treat other things like gods all the time, right? And in America, the market is a god, uh, in which we need to like agree and we need to cooperate and we need to obey. And we are told this not only by the economy itself, but by our leaders, right? Um, Now, so in that chapter on ideological strong arming, I do some work on actually trying to pair it up with the biblical narrative, right? So that we can see, because our minds are trained in the Western world to think in terms of this narrative. I mean, even if we're not Christians, it's still like there in the background, right? So in the story that's typically embraced by a lot of Christians, which is not necessarily the truth of the matter, but the story that is embraced by a lot of Christians is that, there was this original fall from grace. Satan rebelled against God, and that creates evil. And then Adam and Eve, sorry, typo, then fell from grace, tempted by Satan. And now people continue to fall from grace by choosing to follow Satan's lead instead of God's commands. And the only reason why they're saved at all is through Jesus. But really, there's always this sense of like, sort of like extreme moral responsibility. Every choice we make is ours. We can either agree or rebel, and rebellion could have really drastic consequences, including eternal damnation. So it's pretty serious, right? Um, and so, this reading of the biblical narrative, not that it's necessarily true, but it's very, very common, often leads naturally to people blaming their own sinfulness, for blaming themselves for their own misfortunes, blaming themselves for their sinfulness, and feeling very guilty, and then trying to repair that constantly, but never feeling good enough. So there's a lot of in this type of way of thinking, there's a lot of like self examination, but not that much examination of the forces beyond oneself that might have made one very inclined or even necessitated certain types of behavior. Okay. It's all about me, right? And not about the conditions under which I have been operating that influenced me that or made me do certain things, rightly or wrongly, right? This is a deep trope, let's say, in the Western mind. It certainly is in the American mind. So I I studied like people like McCarraher and Adam Kotsko, who had explicitly drawn analogies between this Christian narrative and the economic neoliberal narrative. And they match up. So the reason why that's important is because it's just easier for people to embrace an ideological narrative if it already falls into a pattern that they are very familiar with and it's deeply ingrained in their minds. So the neoliberal narrative goes that our economic misfortunes are caused by our individual wrong economic choices, and that this equates to the sin of disobedience towards this godlike system that has laws that we have disobeyed. And so we as individuals, because we have made the wrong choices, are to blame for our losses and our lack of resources. And in order uh, to get right and to get out of that situation, we need to get right with the economy. We need to reconcile with it. We need to be blessed by it, by obeying it. Okay.